Welcome back to another edition of Grumpy Science with Mark Tommerdahl and Bob Dennis.
Yep, and where we have about milked Bob's stroke for everything we can, but now we're going to segue into milking the hurricane.
I'm missing appointments and stuff, and so, I've got an excuse.
So
does Mark. He just says, I didn't make it because, Bob had a stroke.
Yeah, exactly. I can't do anything because
he's got a universal excuse. It's one size fits all. So
now we're in the middle of hurricane country, and so that's our new excuse. And it's cloudy and rainy today, which we really don't need.
We're both in the middle of North Carolina, and I've got a house down on Topsail Island. I think I'm going to drive down tomorrow to see what's left of it.
Part of your neighborhood's no longer there. It's a good way to, attrition is a good way to have your property value go up, unless your property disappears.
The ocean throws up, a lot of sand, and it pulls it back. The ocean giveth and it taketh away. There may not be property there anymore.
Yeah, so Mother Nature just has her way of forming things.
Well, I'm one of those 10% who's actually been paying for flood insurance.
So, it's actually 0.1% in North Carolina.
Well, on the coast. I'm one
on the coast,
it's
10%.
Though I think the Wall Street Journal said 10%. So I'm, giving everyone the maximum benefit of the doubt. Although I may be pretty much by myself on the island there after. We'll see what it looks like. Anyway, so that's the big adventure this weekend. But today, we are going to talk about...
Well, we're going to segue from Mother Nature. Pounding on the coast.
Force majeure.
Into talking about... I like to think of things on an evolutionary scale. And sort of like, for example, we've talked about plasticity before. And that's your brain's ability to adapt to different situations. And one of the interesting things I like to think about is how does plasticity benefit us? And also sometimes it doesn't benefit us.
Well, the arguments I see in the literature, and I'm not an expert, Mark's an expert, but the arguments I see in the literature is that neuroplasticity is a natural daily part of just learning, right? I mean, that's what they sort of in its minimum sort of like background activity. Neuroplasticity is going on all the time.
You've got neurons always firing.
They're always
responding to what you do and whatever, so that's always part. The nature versus nurture thing is that nature's what you've got to start with, and nurture is how you sort of guide yourself through your environment. Now, one of the things I was just sort of pondering on was how it is that what's the role of inertia, and why does plasticity? The good side of plasticity is that you can get really good at certain things. The bad side of plasticity is you get really comfortable at doing certain things.
You get really comfortable. You kind of get into a rut.
And it gets you into a rut, and you start doing the same thing over and over again, like just sitting and staring off into space. Say you're really good at, a lot of us get really good at being entertained.
Well, about 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago.
By the way, Grumpy Science is an entertainment, so don't feel guilty for watching
this. This is.
Now we're speaking to both our viewers.
Entertainment. Yeah. It is. If you happen to be from some regulatory agency, this is pure entertainment. If you happen to be a regular person, this is actually scientific opinions and anger.
Science. Yeah.
So I remember reading about 25 years ago. They had done a huge study. It was partially done at University of Michigan, where I was in graduate school, about the 4 things you need to do to age successfully. They had a huge study, and 3 of those 4 things amount to, looking at it through the lens of the 21st century now, 3 of those 4 things amount to activities in which, when you engage in them, they promote neuroplasticity, such as remaining socially active and talking to people, learning new things, taking on new challenges and exercising, sort of the other one was make sure you get enough.
3 of 4?
3 of the 4. The other one
I don't
was,
have to talk to
the
other
4th
people.
one was, no kidding. Well, he's got to compensate otherwise. Being extremely grumpy about new things is a way to maintain your neuroplasticity. That's what we do. But the one that sort of wasn't was, make sure you got enough money in the bank so you don't have to eat dog food when you're, 80. But everything else had to do with things that are now known to enhance neuroplasticity.
Right, which is constant exposure to novel things, constantly trying new things,
And dealing with
Not getting in a
difficult and irritating things, like, you know, if you're married with children, you're in luck, right? You know, just hang around with those irritating offspring of yours. I mean, they're just as irritating to.
So it's all from, you know, and if you believe in evolution, which we grumpily do,
yeah,
you know, it's basically there's a form of evolution which basically has pushed us into getting really good at certain tasks, but is also works against us when you don't constantly take advantage of it.
Yeah, when you're challenging yourself a little bit, not too much. You know, that which does not kill me makes me stronger, kind of thing. When you challenge yourself a little bit, put yourself in challenging environments, it actually helps. Did I ever tell you the story about how I studied biochemistry?
No.
So I lived in an apartment in Ann Arbor graduate school, and I was taking an intensive biochemistry course, and my neighbor was kind of noisy and irritating, and it was difficult for me to study. I tried going to a library, and it was actually harder for me to study when it was completely quiet. So what I did was I went to the bar. I went to the loudest, most violent, filled with ignorant people bar I could find in Ann Arbor, which, I'll give it a plug, is the Blind Pig. I was actually a bouncer there, so I knew about it. And I would go to the noisiest place down in the pool hall, and I would hole up in the corner, and I would study, and that was the best studying I have ever done in my life.
But that's really good, because
a lot of white noise in the background, a lot of irritation, jumping out of the way of the occasional beer bottle.
Yeah, and from our computational neuroscience studies, we do a little bit of neural network stuff. Neural networks perform much better if they have background noise.
Stochastic noise. You can actually look this up. Stochastic noise. It works in the brain, right? That's what you're talking about, right? It works in the brain. It even works in image processing. You can take a really light image that is really hard to see, and if you add the right amount of noise, the right frequencies, the right amounts, it can actually resolve the image and make it look clearer. And a lot of this has to do with the fact I think neurally, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is a theory is on neural networks that, you know, nerves are sort of just operating below the noise threshold, you know, below a certain threshold, like an activation threshold, not activation, but sort of a stimulus threshold. And then when you add noise, it's just enough to bump some neurons over that threshold. Yeah. And the ones that are closest to the threshold are the ones that are trying to kind of come up into consciousness or whatever. And if you give them a little extra energy from the noise, they're going to kind of stand out a little bit more.
Yeah. So like Nmda receptors are,
for example,
the most common receptor class in the upper cortical layers, and they're activated by things like glutamate. In other words, they're excitatory, but they're called voltage gated or voltage dependent receptors, because now it's like if you give them one stimulus, they're not active.
Right. They require
one stimulus. They need some priming.
It's like a consensus. Right?
They actually have to have priming.
It's like a consensus response, right? I mean, it's got to be more than one input. And finally, the nerves are like, all right, whatever. I'll go ahead. I'm listening.
Well, it's also temporally submates too.
It's a little bit complicated. You got to be primed, and there's some signals that have to go.
Oh, and keep in mind, whatever we say is usually wrong. So.
That's right. So there is the contra grumpy science, which is fact-checking everything we say and actually getting everything right. And if you can't find out whether or not it's true, just make the assumption that we're wrong.
Yeah.
You've got about an 80%.
So evolution has given us, you know, plasticity, which also, if treated well, it makes you really good at certain functions. But if you don't take advantage of it, you can have maladaptive plasticity.
Yeah.
So let me give you an example of maladaptive function. Or maladaptive evolution. So we've talked about how administration in universities has ballooned.
I would say talk is a generous, kind, sort of gentle term of describing what we've done. Okay. So like we go back and watch the one with Jeff McDonald where we actually pulled out numbers to show this. And we showed numbers just over the last 10 years, but over the last 30 years, we actually did something. We did.
Over the last 30 years, it's gone from a ratio of 3 faculty to 1 administrator.
My favorite.
To
one faculty
and 3 administrators.
That actually happened while I was at the University of Michigan. So the ratio of administrators to faculty went from 1 to 3 to 3 to 1. So it changed by a factor of 9.
So in the early days, when like a faculty person wanted to buy something, and there was one person in the purchasing department, and their job was to like write a check. This was before credit cards. That's how long I've been around. And they would their job would be okay, you want to buy this from that vendor. Like, you want to buy this computer from that company. Okay, we'll go buy it. And they had really no input on what you were buying. Now it's evolved, being the key word, in a maladaptive format to where we have, or devolved, to where we have multiple purchasing agents, and those guys now think that they're in charge, so that, like, if you need to buy a computer with money that you brought into the university with your own money, and you need to buy a computer, for example, they will say, oh, you've got to buy it from this vendor. And that actually usually works out. They have a contract which was dependent on somebody having lunch with somebody else, and then you pay 3 or 4 times what you would normally pay.
Or you're buying an inferior product.
And an inferior product, so we won't name names.
Lowest bidder.
But yeah.
welcome to the finances of state purchasing.
Right. So we had a little thing going on with one of our satisfied customers is going on. Actually, he bought a brain gauge.
Scientific collaborators.
He bought a brain gauge for personal use, and he likes it, and he's trying to get one at work, and
couldn't get one.
The purchasing agent, who was a lawyer, decided that they had to write a proposal to him to describe it. Now, in terms of man hours, just to put a number on it, right now, it looks like they're actually having to draw money out of another account to pay for their activities. They're on an order of 2 to 3 times, spend as much, almost 2 or 3 times as much, writing a proposal to the person internal at that institution who's insisting on a proposal. Right. They're spending 2 to 3 times what they will eventually spend on their brain gauge MD.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, that's about right. Actually, I got really upset about what it costs to do research at a university. So I went and complained to some administrators about it and dug around a little bit. And I discovered that they used to have purchasing requests. Now they have P cards. For about 20 years or so, they've had P cards, which is just a credit card with the university's name on it. But right before that, as this whole administrator thing started to get out of control, what I discovered was that at the University of Michigan, it was the same problem here when I came here. The average purchase order placed by a laboratory, they would have to fill out a form and all this stuff, and then your grant number, and it would go to purchasing, and then purchasing would buy the item for you. The average purchase order was for $35, $34 and change worth of supplies. The cost to, for the laboratory, so you're buying, whatever, rubbing alcohol or distilled water or something. Average, looking across the entire university, the average purchase order was $34. Do you know what the average cost was to process those purchase orders?
I'm going to guess that it was at least $72.
$119.
Holy cow.
I checked. It was about the same here at UNC as it was at Michigan. It was $119. So to buy $35 worth of stuff, we had to pay $120 worth of administrators to process it.
So many years ago.
So what did you say, about 3 or 4 times as much?
That's what I'm guessing.
Yeah. So,
but in terms of man hours,
that was a good guess because I, did the math, right?
But this is when I first ran into these problems. My dad was still alive, and I was telling him.
Can you imagine that, 2 Tommerdahls? Yeah. Grumpiness. Yeah, turn it down. I'm getting a sunburn.
And you think I'm grumpy? Man, my dad was hardcore.
Sometimes he channels his father. It is a sight to behold.
Gotta understand, my dad fired people for hanging their coat in the wrong place.
Oh yeah, standing at the water cooler.
And he worked at a research institute.
Yeah,
and he just said he just had no,
It is a curmudgeonly old SOB.
We're talking about somebody who, when somebody came and complained to him about not being able to get all the work done, he just said, well, I haven't seen you in here after 5 or on weekends.
Yeah.
So I used to go to work with my dad on the weekends, so I would get to see him.
Well, tell the story about the administrator.
But I'm getting ready to tell.
Okay,
so on the topic of purchasing, one of the guys now it's a big institute, you might have heard of it, Research Triangle Institute, where he worked, and he ended up being one of the directors or VPs there. Well, one of the guys decided that he was going to start a purchasing department there.
Because it would increase the efficiency to have
people don't understand what to buy, or if people want to buy stuff, I'm going to be in charge of that. And my dad looked at it and he's like, let me think, how much you making? And how much you going to save? And he just looked and said, all right, you're fired. We're done. And it was that.
He just fired him. So his dad probably saved this company, $100,000 a year for
Easily.
the rest of the time of the company. I've been on the blunt end of that change. They changed that at the University of Michigan, where you had to justify everything you purchased. Do you remember that? Did they do that?
Yeah.
So, like, if you wanted to buy a pencil in about 1988, you could buy a pencil. You could just go to the bookstore, buy a pencil, bring the receipt. By about 1994, if you wanted to buy a pencil, you had to do a study to see which pencils got like the best value. You had to actually justify that you were buying a pencil that was priced appropriately. You had to show competitive pricing. You had to get a couple of quotes and stuff like that. So you could get a really good pencil, but it would cost you a lot of time and money and effort to justify that was the right pencil for you to buy.
Yeah. So,
and that's not a joke. I mean, I've had to justify things like electrical tape. So
yeah.
I mean, come on. So what is this? This is really grumpy science. Why are we so grumpy about this? Because administrators at universities and everywhere, government, they tend to they're like a rash. They tend to grow.
And start to justify their jobs.
And they start to justify their jobs. And how do administrators justify their jobs? The secret is they justify them by the number of people that they manage.
Right. So they make it a little harder.
There's always a bias, or there's always an incentive for them to hire more people and make things harder. And why are we so grumpy about it? Why does it matter to you if you have cancer or some terrible disease and you're watching Grumpy Science because you want some answers? The reason we're telling you this is because the reason that people can't find answers is we're spending all of our time fighting with administrators.
That's part of it. But part of it was an example of maladaptation or malevolution.
Well, there's that too. There is malevolution.
And so we both view that administrative side of things, like in the purchasing stuff, as a maladaptive function of the evolution of this thing.
It's a biological system run amok.
Yeah.
It's about, and this is what happens after stroke, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can have a stroke, and then you can have maladaptive. Yeah, I did actually.
Oh, okay, wow.
You can have.
Is that why you're talking slower?
I'm talking much slower. They say I sound like a Southerner now. But you can have maladaptive recovery from a stroke, and that very frequently happens when you sort of just rest and take it easy, and then when your brain remodels, it remodels to accommodate you taking it easy and not doing much. And this happens in a lot of tissues. In fact, I was just in a doctoral defense yesterday where they were talking about after a cardiac arrest, after tissue damage in the heart, if you don't give it the right kinds of, sort of beneficial stresses to recover, you'll actually get a maladaptive scar formation in the heart. So it's a biological thing. There are similarities to
right, and so the thing to remember about plasticity, and we'll talk about this a little more in another podcast because we'll stop this one pretty soon. Because
why not just go on and on forever?
We'll just go on forever.
They'll watch. How long it is.
But that's maladaptive for them to continue watching
us. Right. If you're still watching, have yourself checked. Anyway, we're talking about what we really started talking about was
maladaptive plasticity is the thing that we actually are learning how to detect. We've been detecting for a while, and it encompasses a lot of mechanisms. There's a lot of different things, but when a couple of those mechanisms are running amok and not working well, it can lead to degenerative disorders. And the reason I was thinking about evolution in general and sort of all the different things that happen in it, and because, okay, how is inertia evolutionarily advantageous? In other words, when you've got plenty, when you're very happy and content, you don't feel like doing anything else.
If you don't use it, you lose it, kind of thing, right?
Right. But that just means, okay, you've accumulated enough nuts in your cave, so you're just going to sit and eat them. So maybe it's good to rest every once in a while, but now it's gotten really easy to store food.
It's gotten really easy to
have it delivered.
A lot of things. Yeah. So this maladaptive evolution thing is something that really, you can. Maybe I'm wrong in saying this. Would you say that the slower response times that younger people have now,
absolutely,
is like that? Yeah. See, I would say that too. It's because they're not having the same level across the board of physical challenges, in teenagers and 20-year-olds.
Could be though. Your reaction time is back down to where.
Mine is back down to where it was. Yeah.
Back down to where most of the 18 to 22-year-olds that we.
And I'm 54, so that's not too bad.
54 with a stroke, and you're almost where a 60-year-old is.
Almost as good as Mark, who works on the farm every day, who's doing better than I am. And I'm doing, I work in a machine shop and do all kinds of physical stuff every day.
But the other point,
20-year-olds.
One other point about maladaptive plasticity or maladaptive behavior. Okay, is that we can measure, and it gives us, and one of the mechanisms is particularly indicative of things like early degenerative disorders, 10 years in advance.
So what does that measure?
Well, that's got to do with feed-forward inhibition, and it's actually tied to insulin and things like that. And I've talked to a lot of clinicians lately who say, patients didn't like their scores, and I said, well, let's see what we can do to get them better. And then people are, you can, and I actually talk to people.
They don't like their scores.
They don't like their scores.
Taking tests, right?
It's like, I don't like my height or weight.
I don't like my blood pressure, so I'm just not going to measure.
I'm just not going to measure my weight.
But there's more maladaptive stuff.
But like one of I look at one data set and I'm like, holy cow, this person's pre-diabetic and their scores are off the charts in a bad way, and I think pretty good chance. But looks like they're heading for a degenerative disorders. Turns out, this person's got Alzheimer's, full-blown Alzheimer's in their family, and I think just looking at their data, they're heading down that trail. And the guy was kind of like, I don't care. So
it doesn't care.
But this happens a lot, and I hear this a lot from people who say, I just don't believe it. Even so, that I tell you about the head of, I gave a talk one time, and the head of the Alzheimer's Association, I'm not going to name the association, but it was a foundation that supported Alzheimer's research, and they said, well, how far in advance do you think you can see this? I said, well, theoretically, we should be able to see subtle changes in neurological function 10 to 15 years before full-blown Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And
how'd you like to have that much more?
And I said, we'd really like to have that kind of get some help with that kind of research. And she or he, keep it
right, keep it as vague as possible.
Said, we don't really want to fund that because anybody that you would be part of that study would probably, you would never, all that would do would be stop their Alzheimer's and not cure it. We're more interested in seeing a cure for it.
Right. Like, prevention of Alzheimer's would mean the end of the foundation, right?
I guess so. But anyway, that's
kind of grumpy.
Yeah. And so I used it, but for the longest time I thought there's no way we can actually do a proper study and look at and get data on people that are 5 to 10 years from having full-blown Alzheimer's and tracking them until they do have full-blown Alzheimer's. And actually I'm finding out that's not the case. We actually can get data on people who have no intention of changing their lifestyle whatsoever.
Right, exactly. You can tell them, hey man, 5 years, 2 months, and 6 days from now, you're going to drop that drug. All right.
As long as we can keep track of them.
Right, as long as we're there when it happens. Right.
We might drop off and forget what our phone number is, or forget our email address.
Right, exactly.
Oh yeah, I was supposed to. They forgot. Anyway, maybe we should quit now.
Let's not be too maladaptive. You don't want to spend too much time watching YouTube. Get up and move around a little bit.
Yeah.
Right. So ding ding, the stop sitting alarm is going off, and we'll talk to you later.
All right. Bye.